John Emil List was born on September 17, 1925, in Bay City, Michigan. His parents, John Frederick List and Alma Barbara Florence List, were devout German Lutherans. John was their only child, and his upbringing was dominated by strict religious practices. His father, an austere man who instilled a strong sense of discipline, ran a grocery business, and his mother Alma was overprotective, nurturing John in an environment of unwavering piety and rigidity. John grew up introverted, with few friends. His social isolation wasn't helped by his strict religious upbringing, which allowed little room for fun or relationships. John excelled in academics, particularly in mathematics and accounting, earning a reputation for being intelligent but socially awkward. In 1943, John enlisted in the U.S. Army during World War II and served as a laboratory technician. After his military service, he utilized the GI Bill to attend the University of Michigan, where he earned both a bachelor's degree in business administration and a master's in accounting. Despite his academic success, John continued to struggle socially. This period of his life laid the foundation for his future mental and emotional struggles, as he sought control and order in an increasingly chaotic and demanding world. In 1951, while stationed at Fort Eustis in Virginia, John met Helen Taylor, a widow with a young daughter. Helen was 9 years his senior, and, despite their age difference, the two quickly married in December 1951. For John, the marriage offered companionship and a semblance of family life, something his own childhood had lacked. However, Helen had her own baggage. She struggled with alcoholism and was later diagnosed with untreated tertiary syphilis, which she had contracted from her first husband. The couple moved to Kalamazoo, Michigan, where John began working as an accountant for a paper company. Helen gave birth to 3 children: Patricia, Frederick, and John Jr. Despite outward appearances of a typical suburban family, their home life was far from peaceful. Helen's health problems worsened, her alcoholism took a toll, and she became increasingly erratic and demanding. John's strict religious views led him to stay in the marriage, though his love for Helen seemed to wane as her health declined. John List's career was marked by frequent job changes, often due to the companies he worked for downsizing or closing. This instability greatly affected him, as he equated financial success with self-worth. His deeply ingrained belief in being the breadwinner, coupled with his declining career prospects, heightened his sense of failure. By the late 1960s, the List family had moved to Westfield, New Jersey, where John took a job as vice president and comptroller at a bank. The family settled into a 19-room mansion called Breeze Knoll, a house that symbolized John's desire for status and success. However, maintaining this luxurious lifestyle was beyond their means, and financial problems began to mount. As the family's financial troubles worsened, John List continued to struggle in his professional life. He was laid off from his job at the bank in 1971, but he didn't tell his family. Instead, he pretended to go to work every day, but in reality, he was sitting in train stations or looking for new employment, which he never found. Bills piled up, the mortgage went unpaid, and foreclosure loomed over their grand home. List's identity was deeply tied to his role as the provider for his family. The collapse of his financial stability, coupled with his devout religious beliefs, caused him to spiral. His wife's health continued to decline, and she became increasingly dependent on him. He believed that his children were straying from their religious upbringing, particularly his daughter Patricia, who expressed a desire to become an actress, a profession List saw as sinful and degrading. The pressure on List built to unbearable levels. He feared losing everything: his home, his family's respect, and his sense of religious righteousness. In his mind, there was no solution to the mounting problems other than death. But rather than seeing his family suffer through homelessness and the embarrassment of public scandal, List rationalized that it was better for them to die. He believed he would be saving their souls, ensuring that they went to heaven rather than allowing them to live in a sinful and impoverished world. On November 9, 1971, John List carried out a meticulously planned massacre of his entire family. His first victim was his wife, Helen. After the children had left for school, List shot her in the back of the head as she sipped her morning coffee at the kitchen table. He then went upstairs to his mother's apartment, where he shot Alma, his 84-year-old mother, in the head as well. With two of his family members already dead, John cleaned up the blood and waited for his children to come home. When Patricia, 16, and Frederick, 13, returned from school, List shot them one by one as they entered the house. He arranged their bodies on sleeping bags in the mansion's ballroom, covering them with towels. John Jr., 15, was the last to arrive home. According to List, John Jr. struggled the most. After initially being shot, John Jr. tried to flee, but List shot him multiple times until he was dead. His body was placed next to his siblings in the ballroom. List wrote letters explaining his actions, including a 5-page confession to his pastor, where he explained that he couldn't stand to see his family fall into financial ruin and stray from their religious values. He believed that by killing them, he was saving their souls and ensuring they would be reunited in heaven. After the murders, List cleaned up the crime scene, turned the thermostat down to slow decomposition, and cut his face out of every family photograph in the house. Then he fled. Before leaving, List set in motion a series of actions designed to delay the discovery of the crime. He stopped the family's mail and milk deliveries and contacted the children's schools, explaining that they would be on an extended trip to visit Helen's sick mother in North Carolina. He then disappeared. After fleeing New Jersey, John List assumed a new identity, Robert Peter Bob Clark. He moved to Denver, Colorado, where he started a new life. Under his alias, he found work as an accountant, joined a local Lutheran church, and eventually remarried a woman named Dolores Miller in 1985. To everyone around him, Bob Clark was a quiet, unassuming man. He lived modestly, far removed from the financial pressures and failures that had driven him to commit such horrific acts. For nearly 18 years, John List remained at large, leading a quiet, unnoticed life in Colorado and later in Virginia. Meanwhile, the murders at Breeze Knoll remained one of the most notorious cold cases in American criminal history. The house itself burned down in a mysterious fire 9 months after the murders, erasing many potential clues. In 1989, the case was revived by the television show America's Most Wanted. The show's producers worked with forensic sculptor Frank Bender to create an age-progressed clay bust of what List might look like nearly 20 years after the murders. The sculpture proved to be eerily accurate, down to the details of List's receding hairline and horn-rimmed glasses. The bust was featured on the show, which aired to millions of viewers. A neighbor of Bob Clark in Virginia recognized the uncanny resemblance and tipped off authorities. On June 1, 1989, John List was arrested at the Richmond accounting firm where he worked. Even after being taken into custody, List initially denied his true identity, claiming to be Bob Clark. However, after his fingerprints were matched to those in military records, he was formally identified as John Emil List. John List's trial began in 1990, nearly 20 years after the murders. During the trial, the defense argued that List suffered from a mental illness, specifically a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder that compelled him to commit the murders to save his family from damnation. They claimed that List's strict religious upbringing, combined with his financial woes and feelings of inadequacy, drove him to believe that murder was the only way to protect his loved ones. The prosecution, however, painted a picture of a cold, calculating killer who meticulously planned and carried out the murders, only to escape and live a new life while his family lay dead in the house for weeks before being discovered. They argued that List's actions were premeditated, pointing to the fact that he had canceled the milk delivery and stopped the mail, demonstrating his clear intent to flee and avoid capture. On April 12, 1990, John List was convicted of 5 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms in prison, without the possibility of parole. During his sentencing, List expressed no remorse for his actions, maintaining that he believed killing his family was the only way to save their souls. John List spent the remainder of his life in prison, where he continued to justify the murders as a necessary act of salvation. In 2002, List was interviewed by journalist Connie Chung, during which he reiterated his belief that his actions had been justified. He claimed that he had been hoping to reunite with his family in the afterlife, stating, "I feel when we get to heaven, we won't worry about these earthly things. They'll understand why I did what I did." John Emil List died on March 21, 2008, at the age of 82, from complications of pneumonia while incarcerated at St. Francis Medical Center in Trenton, New Jersey. The case of John List remains one of the most infamous examples of familicide in American history. It raises difficult questions about the intersection of religion, mental illness, financial stress, and personal failure. While John List may have believed he was saving his family, his actions serve as a stark reminder of how delusion and desperation can lead to unimaginable horror. John List's life before the murders paints a disturbing picture of a man trapped in a web of self-imposed expectations, religious fanaticism, and psychological fragility. List's strict Lutheran upbringing shaped his moral compass, but it also created an oppressive framework in which he felt bound to a rigid set of rules. He believed in absolute moral authority, and his interpretation of Christianity was deeply intertwined with notions of punishment, salvation, and damnation. The mounting financial pressures of the late 1960s and early 1970s exacerbated his deep-seated feelings of inadequacy. In List's mind, he was not only failing as a provider, but also as a father and husband. These failures collided with his fear of eternal damnation, creating an unsustainable mental state. He grew increasingly paranoid, believing that his children were straying from the path of righteousness. Patricia, his eldest daughter, had become particularly troubling to him. She had expressed an interest in acting, which List viewed as immoral. He feared that she was becoming too worldly, too independent, and that her soul was at risk of being lost to sin. Helen's declining health only worsened his mental state. Her alcoholism and erratic behavior were difficult for List to handle. By the time of the murders, Helen had become almost completely dependent on him, not only because of her physical condition but also due to the syphilis that ravaged her mind. John resented her, but also saw her as part of his burden, a burden that weighed on him emotionally, spiritually, and financially. His mother Alma, a staunch and pious woman, only added to his feeling of responsibility, further complicating his ability to seek help or consider a way out other than murder. By the time he lost his job, John List's sense of self was completely tethered to his role as the provider and protector of his family. However, his inability to be honest about his financial failures, coupled with his deteriorating mental health, pushed him deeper into a fantasy world where the only solution was death. Experts who examined John List after his capture painted a picture of a deeply troubled man suffering from undiagnosed mental illness, likely a form of obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, combined with severe depression. List's need for control over every aspect of his life, particularly his finances and family, fits the profile of someone with OCD tendencies. His rigid moral and religious views, which allowed little room for ambiguity or failure, further contributed to his mental decline. List's decision to murder his family instead of seeking help is indicative of his profound inability to cope with failure. He believed that if his family suffered financially or spiritually, it would be a greater sin than their deaths. His story serves as a stark reminder of the complex interplay between mental illness, societal pressures, and the dark depths of the human psyche.